Texas Hill Country, spring of 1873. The sun was already high and hot when they dragged her out of the jailhouse, wrists bound and skirts torn. Dust clung to her face and her lip was split, but she walked straight, chin high, like she still had something left that they had not taken. Marshal Totem barked, "Bring her to the block. Start the auction before folks lose interest." Men gathered in the square of Burnett County, boots grinding against dry dirt, some laughing, some leering. A woman like her, young, strong, with that fire in her eyes, was not often put up for sale, not these days, not legally. But with her land confiscated and no kin to speak for her, the law had found a way to call it compensation. The marshal shouted, "This here's property of the county now." 1 mule, 2 dresses, and this woman, Martha Jane, 20 years old, capable, refused to leave land marked for seizure. Starting bid, stop it. The voice came low, clear, and carried like thunder through the hot air. Heads turned. A tall cowboy stepped out from the shade of the saloon's porch, dust on his boots, his hat low over his brow. He had a rifle strapped to his back, but it was the calm in his eyes that made men shift on their heels. Martha blinked against the sunlight, trying to see him through the blood and sweat in her eyes. He walked slow, steady, and by the time he reached the base of the wooden platform she had been pushed onto, the crowd had gone quiet. "She is not for sale," he said. "She already belongs beside me." Marshal Totem frowned. "You got a deed or claim?" "I got something better," the cowboy said. He looked up at Martha and something in his face softened. "My name is Boone Vexley. And this woman is mine if she'll have me." Martha stared down at him, heart pounding like a war drum. She did not know this man, she had never so much as seen him before, but there was no cruelty in his face, no hunger. Just a quiet steadiness, like he had been waiting a long time to say those words. "You want to explain yourself, Vexley?" The marshal spat. Boone reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "Paid her taxes, bought the land back, it is hers again." "Which means you've got no legal standing to auction her off." He handed the paper over. The marshal read it, color draining from his face. This is dated yesterday." "Rode all night to get it filed in Austin," Boone said. "You can check the seal." The crowd began to murmur. A few folks looked downright disappointed, but the marshal threw the paper down and waved a hand. "Fine. Get her off the platform." Martha's knees almost gave out as they untied her wrists. She stepped down slowly, every muscle aching. She looked at Boone, still unsure if this was real or if she had finally gone mad from the heat and the beatings. "Why?" she asked, voice hoarse. He looked at her like she was the only thing left in the world that made sense. "Because I saw what they were doing to you, and I could not let it stand. And because I think you deserve better than being sold like cattle." She held his gaze for a long second. Then she nodded once, slow, "All right." He offered his hand, not to shake, but just to hold. She took it. They walked through the crowd, side by side. People parted for them, some silent, others whispering. Martha did not care. Her fingers were still wrapped around Boone's. It was the first time in weeks she had touched someone who did not mean her harm. They reached his horse, saddled and waiting at the edge of town. "I have a cabin," he said. "Far west, near the river. Quiet. You can rest there, stay as long as you want, or leave if you want. I will not stop you." Martha looked up at him. The bruises on her face were already turning dark, but her eyes were clear. "You bought my land back," he nodded. "Then I am not going anywhere." They rode west for half a day, through mesquite and cedar, until the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold. His cabin sat near a bend in the Colorado River, small and rough but clean. He helped her down from the horse, careful not to touch her without asking. Inside, he built a fire, boiled water, and laid out a tin plate of biscuits and dried meat. She ate with her fingers, too hungry to be polite. He watched her with quiet eyes but said nothing. Later, he handed her a clean shirt and stepped outside so she could wash and change. When she opened the door again, he was sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes on the trees. "You expecting trouble?" "Not tonight," he said. "But I do not take chances." She sat beside him. The stars came out one by one and the wind turned cool. "You do not know me," she said. "I would like to," he replied. She looked at him again, really looked. He had a scar along his jaw and his hands were rough from work, but there was a steadiness in him, like a man who had seen too much and come out the other side quieter but not broken. "My name is Martha Jane Jasper." He nodded. "Good to meet you, Martha." She leaned back against the post, her body sore but her chest lighter than it had been in months. She still had the land, her name. And now, maybe, something more. He did not reach for her, did not press. Just sat there beside her, watching the sky. And for the first time since her father died and the county men came, she felt safe. She looked at him again, this stranger who had saved her from that block, who had called her his before he even knew her name. "I think I would like to know you too, Boone." He smiled, slow and warm. "Then we have time." Martha rose before dawn, drawn from sleep by the scent of coffee and the hush of river wind curling through the open window. The bruise along her ribs ached when she sat up, but she welcomed the pain. It reminded her she was still her own. She pulled on the shirt Boone had given her, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and stepped outside barefoot, the dirt cool beneath her feet. Boone stood by the fire pit, bareheaded, one hand steadying a tin cup, the other holding a long stick he used to stir the coals. His shirt was crumpled from sleep and his boots were unlaced, but his eyes were already scanning the brush beyond the clearing. "You don't sleep much," she said. He turned his head slightly, not startled, not for long stretches. She crossed her arms, watching the way his shoulders moved. "War, before that," he said, but that didn't help. She didn't press. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. She sat on the edge of the porch and took the cup he offered. "What do you plan to do with the land now that it's yours again?" he asked. She blew on the coffee. "Had a few goats before they confiscated them. I'd like to get more, maybe a few hens. Something honest I can tend. You had goats by yourself. I had more grit than sense." She sipped. "I just didn't trust anyone to help who wasn't looking to take something." He knelt to stoke the fire, his face lit orange by the glow. "You can keep not trusting me if that's what you need." "I won't take offense." "I don't think you would," she said, "but I don't think I need to." They sat like that a while, letting the sun rise slow over the trees. A squirrel skittered across the roof. Somewhere upriver, a hawk cried once, sharp and high. Boone stood and dusted his hands. "I've got a fence needs mending across the ridge. You're welcome to rest here while I go, or ride along if you feel steady enough." She didn't answer right away. "You got another horse?" "Just the one, but he'll take us both." She pulled her hair back with her fingers. "All right. I'll come." They rode out slow, her arms around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. The hills rose gentle around them, dotted with scrub oak and limestone outcrops. When they reached the fence line, he dismounted and handed her the reins. "You hold him," he said. "He spooks at snakes. I can handle that." He worked with a rhythm that spoke of years doing the same task, pulling wire taut, hammering in new posts, checking knots. She studied the way he moved, not hurried but deliberate, like he knew the land wouldn't yield to anything rushed. "You always live this far out?" she asked. "Since my brother passed," he said without looking up. "Didn't sit right being near town after that." "What happened to him?" "Fell from a horse. Broke his neck clean. Wasn't a bad rider, just unlucky." She swallowed. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." She didn't offer more. He didn't need it. By the time they returned to the cabin, the light was softening again, drifting pink across the grass. Boone unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down while Martha gathered kindling. She moved slower now, the ache in her legs catching up with her. "You need to lie down," Boone said gently. "I'll rest when I've earned it." He didn't argue. Instead, he laid a hand on her back for just a moment. Inside, she folded a blanket on the cot and stretched out. Boone sat by the door, carving a piece of cedar into something small and shapeless. His knife made a soft scraping sound, steady as breath. "You said you saw what was happening to me," she murmured. "How?" "I was in Burnett to trade for seed," he said. "Heard a ranch hand talking about the auction. I went to see if it was true." She stared at the ceiling. "I didn't think anyone would care." "I didn't either," he said. She turned her head. "Then why did you?" He set the carving down. "Because I've had folks look at me like I was nothing but a burden. I know what it does to a person." She blinked once, slowly. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," he said. Night fell quiet, no talk of the past, no promises for after. Just the creak of the rocking chair and the hush of wind against the cabin walls. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "If I start again, goats, hens, all of it, I'd need help building the pens." "You'd have it," Boone said, his voice low in the dark. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long while there was no weight pressing on her chest. Just the sound of breath, steady across the room, and the knowledge that come morning, she wouldn't be facing the world alone. 2 days passed with the hush of early spring settling deep into the hills. Martha's limbs still carried the weight of her bruises, but the stiffness had begun to ease, and she moved through Boone's cabin with more certainty, her hand brushing the edge of the table as she passed, her gaze no longer darting to the door each time the wind shifted. Boone had spent the morning splitting logs on the north side of the clearing, his shirt damp at the collar, his jaw tight with focus. When Martha stepped outside with a pail in one hand and a strip of salted pork in the other, he paused and leaned on the axe handle. "You always cut wood like you're trying to settle something?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the sun. Boone wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Just keeping ahead of the weather. These hills turn cold when the wind comes down from the Llano." She nodded and lowered the pail into the well. The rope creaked as it unwound. "I've never seen that kind of red dirt before, not till I came west. It runs through the water like rust." "It's iron," he said. "Makes the cattle strong, makes the land harder to work." Martha hauled the pail up and set it on the bench. "You ever think of leaving it behind, all this?" "I tried once," he said. "Got as far as San Saba, spent 6 days in a room above a dry goods store, couldn't breathe right, not with all the people. Came back the same week." She washed her hands in the bucket, letting the cold water run over her wrists. "I don't know where I'd go, even if I could. I don't have people waiting anywhere." Boone didn't speak right away. He drove the axe into a stump and walked toward her slow. When he stopped just a few steps away, she tilted her chin and met his eyes. "You don't have to go anywhere," he said. "Not unless your heart says different." Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the way his voice held no push in it, just room. "I used to think I'd marry a man from back home," she said. "Someone who worked the riverboats, maybe, someone who liked music." "You still want that?" "I don't know what I want yet," she answered. "But I keep looking at your hands and thinking I'd trust them to fix anything I broke." Boone's mouth parted like he might say something, but he only reached down and picked up the pail. "You shouldn't be hauling this with your ribs still healing." "You gonna stop me?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'll just walk beside you." They moved up the slope toward the shed, where wooden troughs and a rusted kettle lay waiting. Martha knelt and scrubbed the old iron clean. Boone poured water over it, careful not to splash her. When their hands touched, neither of them pulled away. "I'll need to trade for seed next week," she said. "There's a man in Lampasas who sells corn and rye cheap." "I'll take you," Boone offered. Wagon's got a cracked wheel, but I can mend it by Sunday. You always fix things yourself. I was raised that way. Pa said if you can't mend it, you don't own it. She sat back on her heels and studied him. You ever think about owning something more than a cabin and a fence line? He met her eyes steady. I think about waking up with someone who wants to be here. I think about hearing her voice in the morning, knowing she stayed because she chose to. Martha's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. That's not the same as owning. No, he said. It's better. The sun had climbed past its peak when they stopped for bread and apples in the shade of a cypress. Boone leaned against the trunk, his boots crossed at the ankle. Martha sat beside him, her skirt draped over her knees, the hem still damp from the well. You ever been in love? She asked, her voice low but not uncertain. He chewed the last bite of his apple, thoughtful. Once, when I was younger. She married a rancher east of Mason. I don't think she loved him. I think her father made the match. Did it break you? No, he said. Made me quiet for a long time, that's all. Martha nodded. I thought I was in love once. He said kind words, then left when the money got tight. I found out later he'd taken a ring from my mother's chest before he went. Boone didn't offer pity. He only reached for her hand where it rested on the grass. You've got strength in you that most men wouldn't know what to do with, he said. But I'm not most men. No, she said. You're not. She didn't move her hand. His thumb brushed the back of it once, then stilled. The river whispered below them. A bird called from deeper in the woods, 3 notes in a row, then silence. I want to stand on my land again, Martha said. Not just walk through it, but stand and know it's mine and won't be taken. You'll have that, Boone said. I'll see to it. She looked at him, not with disbelief, but with something slow and dawning. Why did you save me, really? He turned to her, the brim of his hat casting his face in shade. Because I saw a woman standing on that block who still had fight in her. And I knew if I let them break her, something in me would break too. Martha leaned in, and for the first time her head rested against his shoulder. She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to feel everything. The land stretched wide around them, scattered with cedar and rock, and though the world hadn't changed, something inside her had. Something quiet and deep, like the shift in earth before spring. By the end of the week, the wheel was mended and the wagon loaded with a few jars of preserves, a bundle of firewood, and a sack of dried beans. Boone insisted on trading in town. Martha sat beside him on the bench, the hem of her skirt brushing his boot as the wagon creaked down the narrow path toward the Lampasas trail. The land unfolded quiet and wide, low hills sloping into thickets of live oak and wild plum. The air carried the scent of sun-warmed cedar and something faintly sweet blooming verbena scattered along the edge of the trail. She kept her eyes on the horizon, but her hand rested lightly on the worn wood beside his. Boone glanced at her once. You ever been to Lampasas proper? No, she said. Closest I ever came was when my uncle passed through with a wagon team. Said the place had 2 churches and a saloon with a crooked piano. That's still mostly true. They added a boarding house last year. Run by a widow who used to teach letters in Galveston, real stern, but she feeds folks like she's trying to make peace with the world. Martha gave a soft breath that might have been a laugh. You sound like you spend a fair bit of time there. Only when I have to. I don't care much for crowds or men trying to sell me things I didn't ask for. She didn't say anything to that, just watched a hawk wheel high above the trees. The road narrowed where a tree had fallen weeks ago, the trunk half cleared, bark stripped by passing wheels. Boone guided the wagon around it without needing her help. When they reached the edge of town, the buildings rose up out of the dust like old bones, weathered storefronts. A livery with a broken sign, and the faint clang of a blacksmith's hammer ringing from somewhere behind the mercantile. Martha sat straighter, her shoulders drawing in. Boone kept the reins loose. "We'll stop at the seed man's first, then the general store. If anything feels too close, you say the word and we leave." "I'm not afraid," she said. "I didn't say you were." Inside the mercantile, the air was close and smelled of soap, kerosene, and old flour. Boone greeted the clerk with a nod and handed over a folded list. Martha kept near the counter, letting her fingers drift over stacked bolts of cloth and packages of needles. A pale-haired girl no older than 15 watched her from the back corner, wide-eyed and silent, until her mother pulled her away. Boone returned with a small sack of corn seed and a tin of axle grease. That's all they had left till the next shipment from Waco. "Then it'll do," Martha said. "We can make it stretch." As they left, Boone paused by the doorway. "There's a man here I want you to meet. He's old, but he knows the land better than most. Used to run goats along the San Gabriel before the drought." "I'd like that," she said. They found the man sitting on a bench beneath a cottonwood, his beard gone silver and his hands marked with sun and time. His name was Harlan, and when Boone introduced her, he tipped his hat with a rough kindness. "You're the girl they tried to sell," he said, not cruelly. Martha nodded once. "I'm the woman who kept her name." His eyes crinkled at that. "Then you've got more grit than most men I know. If you're thinking goats, get the Spanish ones. They'll eat anything and they don't spook easy." Boone listened with quiet respect as Harlan spoke, but it was Martha who asked the questions about shelter, birthing, fencing cedar instead of pine. When they finally stood to leave, the old man touched the brim of his hat again. "You take care of her," he said to Boone. Boone's voice was steady. "I intend to." They rode out of town as the sun began to fall behind the ridge, the wagon lighter than before, but the space between them filled with something unspoken. Martha watched the sky turn dusky blue, the trees casting long shadows across the road. She broke the silence first. "You didn't have to bring me here. You could have gone yourself." "I didn't want to go myself," he said. She looked at him, turning the words over. "There's talk in that town." "About me, about you." "I don't live for talk," he said. "I live for what I can see and hold." The wagon bumped over a rut and her hand braced against his thigh without thinking. She didn't move it right away. Neither did he. When they reached the cabin, Boone unloaded the supplies while she set water to boil. The windows glowed faintly with dusk. He stepped inside once the last crate was stacked and stood near the hearth, his face unreadable. "I've been thinking," she said, not turning from the stove. "If I'm going to keep this land, I'll need someone to put my name to it proper." Boone's breath caught just once. "You mean marriage?" "I mean partnership," she said, "but I won't ask for one without the other." He stepped closer, his boots soft against the pine floor. "I'd stand beside you in front of any preacher you name." She turned then, meeting his eyes. "I don't want a promise made quick and forgotten. I want something that holds through lean years and hard ground. I've got no other kind of promise to give." She reached out, her hand resting against his chest. "Then ask me, Boone Vexley. Ask me like it's real." He bowed his head just enough to meet her with his whole heart. "Martha Jane Jasper, will you build something true with me, the kind that doesn't break when the wind turns?" She didn't cry. She didn't need to. "Yes. I'll build it with you." And when he kissed her, it was slow and sure, like a man who'd carried the weight of silence too long and finally found the words worth speaking. The fire cracked low in the hearth. The night curled around the cabin like a sheltering hand. Outside, the land waited patient and wide and ready. The preacher came 3 days later, brought in by a neighbor who passed once a month with letters and news from Burnett County. He was a thin man with wind-chapped cheeks and a voice like dry paper, but he wore his coat clean and carried a Bible wrapped in oilcloth. Boone met him at the edge of the clearing and guided him to the porch, where Martha waited with a basin of warm water and a towel for his hands. They were married beneath the live oak near the well, the water still catching the last of the morning light. No guests, no music, just the two of them, the preacher, and a pair of mourning doves cooing from the rafters of the shed. Martha wore a dress she had mended herself, the sleeves let out to fit comfortable over her arms. Boone brushed the dust from his collar and stood still as stone when she took his hand. "You come here free," the preacher said, his voice worn soft by years of wind. "You stay by choice." They did not speak vows beyond what was needed. Boone looked at her with a steadiness that needed no flourish. Martha nodded once when the preacher asked if she would take him, her lips parted just enough to catch her breath. When it was done, Boone kissed her brow, then her mouth, his hand gentle at the base of her neck like he was holding something precious. The preacher left with biscuits wrapped in cloth and a tin of lard Boone pressed into his hand. No payment was asked, but the man took Boone's grip with both hands before he rode on. That night, the cabin was quiet but for the rustle of wind against the shutters. Martha sat on the edge of the bed, her hair unpinned, falling in loose waves. Boone knelt to bank the fire, then turned. "I've known hard years," he said, "but not one day has felt wasted since I met you." She reached for him. "I don't need a softer life, just one that's mine with someone who won't leave when it gets hard." "I'll be here," he said. "Every season, every turn of it." They lay down with the window open to the stars, their hands clasped between them, the warmth of their bodies enough to hold off the chill. The weeks that followed brought rain, just light enough to soften the topsoil. Martha took to walking the land with a strip of linen tied around her wrist to keep the sweat from her brow. Boone built the goat pen near the slope where the grass grew thickest, and Martha lined it with cedar branches to keep the scent of predators away. They rode into San Saba once to trade for seed potatoes and came back with a hen that took to Boone's shoulder like it had always belonged there. He named her Nettie. Martha laughed so hard she dropped the sack of flour. One afternoon, while Martha was mending a saddle girth, Boone sat beside her and ran his fingers through a small pouch of polished river stones. "My mother used to keep one like this," he said. "She'd rub them together when she was thinking something through." "What are you thinking through?" she asked. "Whether I could shape this land for more than goats, maybe a few head of cattle, enough to trade come fall." Martha looked up from her stitching. "You've got the hands for it. And the grit, but we'd need fencing and someone to watch the calves when we're gone." "There's a boy east of the ridge," Boone said. "His folks passed in the fever last year. He's been working his uncle's land, but I hear he's looking for steadier ground. You trust him? I met his father once. He was good with horses and better with people. If the boy's half of that, he'll do fine." They brought him in 2 weeks later, 17, quiet and thin as rope, but with a way of watching animals that made Martha take notice. He slept in the loft and worked for his meals. When Martha asked him once if he missed town, he only said, "No one there knew my name." Boone gave him the job of tending the goats and watching the fence lines. Martha taught him how to set snares and boil starch for mending. He listened without complaint, and by summer's start, he smiled more than he didn't. The land, once silent and still, began to breathe. Wildflowers bloomed near the river bend. The hens laid regular. Martha planted squash and beans in rows straight enough to make her mother proud. Boone fixed the roof with shingles he carved himself. They slept each night with the windows open and woke when the light crept through the cracks in the shutters. One morning, Boone came in from checking the fence with a slip of paper in his hand. "Letter from Mason," he said. "A woman's asking if we'll take in a girl 12 orphaned. She says the child's quick with numbers and quiet." Martha read it twice and set it down. "If she wants a place, she's got one." Boone nodded and nothing more was said. That fall, they built a second cabin, smaller and closer to the river. Illy took it as his own and began to speak of tending his own stock. The girl, Clara, arrived with a wool shawl and a single satchel. She watched everything without speaking for 2 days. On the third, she sat beside Martha and asked if goats ever remember names. "They do," Martha said, "if you say them kindly enough." The years came steady after that. The land gave them barley and milk and meat that lasted through winter. Clara grew tall and quick with a blade when it came to skinning rabbits. Illy stayed, even when he could have gone. They never called it a farm, just home. On the 5th spring, Boone planted a pecan tree near the well. Martha stood beside him, one hand on her belly, the other brushing dirt from her apron. He looked up at her, sun in his eyes. "She'll be born in summer," she said. He reached for her hand. "She'll be strong." Martha leaned into his side, her voice low. "She'll have your steadiness and my fire." "Lord help the world." Boone kissed her temple and rested his hand over hers. "Whatever comes, we'll meet it," and they did, together, always. The land held them. The wind carried their laughter, and the river kept its slow, quiet song.